Good morning. Welcome to First Advent Sunday's vlog on postmodern deconstruction and its deliberate analysis. But you know, as a fan of Downchild and the Blues Brothers, whom they inspired, I want you to listen to a very prophetic tune that they did. You listen to this.
A wish sandwich is the kind of a sandwich where you have 2 slices of bread and
And you wish.
wish you had some meat. Bow, bow, bow.
Eh? You wish you had some meat. Because postmodern ideology is an ideology without any meat. There is no substance to it whatsoever. Postmodern deconstruction's sole achievements are tearing down, undermining, and destroying. It creates nothing but nihilism and ruin, while hiding behind an easily disprovable guise of justice and equity. By means of this ideological sleight of hand, it has deconstructed liberalism into a nihilistic denial of every fundamental value, which once, not so long ago, gave our lives meaning. I've met this postmodern mindset up close and personal. I know these postmodernists and the wealthy elite behind this mind worm. It has no powers of creation and has a great deal power to destroy. And like Derrida and Foucault, who foisted this cultural Marxist card trick on a despairing, nihilistic, and unselfactualized generation, the West will remain unactualized as long as it clings to this narrative. But we're going to do a deep dive into this narrative, not in my words, but in the words of a postmodern deconstructionist with whom I had a conversation this past week. It is so remarkable. You know, there's this concept in Scandinavia of being ydmyk and gu, being humble and kind. But it isn't real humility, and it certainly isn't kindness. It's more of the Uriah Heep kind. They will pillar, vilify, and censor anyone who disagrees with their premises. Diversity to them does not mean diversity of opinion. Diversity to them means diversity of ethnic identity and sexual identity, but absolute blind cultural conformity. So let's examine the conversation I had with this fellow by beginning with last week's vlog. And this is the premise. Now remember, although I am a Christian, here I am speaking allegorically. I am speaking in terms of metaphors. You know the old song, "You're going to serve somebody"? You are going to serve somebody. You will serve a principle that you deem to be your highest prioritized need or value. That is a form of worship, and that you place it in a place of being worthy. Okay? So, is man truly an atheist if he worships the state? That was the premise of last week's vlog. It begins with this. I'll read this fellow's comments as they appear. So, you don't get atheists at all. The fact is, I don't care if you're an atheist. I'm not trying to make converts here. I'm speaking metaphorically. Whatever you place in the highest value, you will worship. Then I asked him, do you have a higher order sense of right and wrong? Invariably, you will personify those objectifications. Whatever form that personification takes, you will treat as your God, whether you describe it as such or not. And if you had actually watched the vlog, you would understand that is the point. Nietzsche stated that our rejection of the grand narrative force man into becoming his own God, namely the Übermensch, which is sort of the Cole's Notes 101 version of Nietzsche. So then he comes back. The very rejection of the grand narrative forced Nietzsche to frame things using the very... he's removed this remark. So he denied that that was what Nietzsche had said. He denied that that was what Nietzsche had said. Now he comes back to me with this. Do you have a higher order sense of right and wrong? Higher order. I'm not a moral realist, if that's what you're asking. So he claims he has no sense of right and wrong. He doesn't believe there's anything absolutely right or absolutely wrong. Invariably, I say, you will personify those objectifications. I don't objectify morality since I'm not a moral realist. So this is becoming the Monty Python argument invariably that postmodernism devolves into. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. Whatever form that personification takes, you will treat as your God. Nope, unless the word God has lost all its meaning. This guy doesn't understand metaphors. Nietzsche stated that our rejection of the grand narrative forced man into becoming his own God, namely the Übermensch, only if you're stuck in the Abrahamic framework with its Platonic realism as Nietzsche was. So, here's the thing. He keeps talking about the Abrahamic framework as we go down in this feed. But the fact remains that the underpinning substructures behind Western philosophy are certainly not entirely Abrahamic. In his culture, there's a great deal of Norse mythology still underpinning the narrative that defines Norway. They do not say, for instance, Merry Christmas. They say God Jul. And Yule is one of the names they gave to Odin, who is their god of wisdom. And like most people in the Northern Hemisphere, they had a major festival around the turning of the year when the year had come to its final end, when it was shortest, and then again began to emerge into a new year with longer days. Every ancient civilization did, and in fact, of course, Christmas wasn't celebrated until the 3rd or 4th century in the Western Church. There was no such tradition of celebrating the birth of Christ and giving Jesus a birthday party, as though God needs his own birthday party. But his loathing of the Abrahamic framework and his own, the substructures of Norse mythology that underlie his culture, is palpable because he seeks to tear down, which is the first premise. My point is that we personify this, he's quoting me now, higher order values in a godlike manner, not literally as God. I do not know what you find to be godlike, but I wouldn't even say that I personify higher order values in an acquaintance-like manner, as many realists often conceptualize them. As many anti-realists, I conceptualize them. So here, he admits he's an anti-realist. In other words, the fundamental underpinning belief in postmodernism is to deny reality itself. Then I asked him, did your Viking ancestors frame their personal deities in an Abrahamic manner? No, but they sure had their gods, whose influences are still felt in Norway. It doesn't matter that they weren't real, since your ancestors perceived them as real, which is why I assert man personifies good and evil. So he answers, but the Norse did not personify good and evil. There were evil or chaotic entities like Ymir, Loki, and Midgård, serpent, but no personification of good and evil, which is patently false, by the way. They had a value structure, and there were things that they admired and things that they did not admire or that they thought were reprehensible. And to them, that personified good and evil, and they had gods that represented them, including Odin, who was the god of wisdom. There are not that many dualistic worldviews, even if the Abrahamic religions make them prevalent. Again, he goes back to the Abrahamic religions because, of course, of his loathing of Judaism and Christianity. Many worldviews only consider good and evil as abstract concepts that blend together in both people and other entities. Then I answer, that's not true. There has never been a culture that did not have its deities, which did not help inform their perception of the world, whatever those perceptions are or were. These are the deities they worship because their entire value structure was based upon them. Mankind, being a social creature, frames his value systems by personifying them. You simply don't refer to your values as divine, but I am certain your value structure is personified, otherwise you wouldn't be a human being. However, let's not rule that out, because these people appear to be so creepily inhuman. Their whole way of personifying the world, of making sense of it, of creating a map that can give life meaning, literally destroys all the things that have traditionally given humankind meaning. But what's even more worse, it's this. Their wagging of the finger as though they're so good and so moral, in spite of the fact of them supporting things that are essentially amoral, which he admitted, that they think they have the right to wag their finger constantly. The way that they despise America is palpable because they think they're better than Americans. And if it weren't for Great Britain, Canada, and America, they'd still be singing Deutschland, Deutschland über alles. Hitler turned Norway into a baby manufacturing machine because he thought that being perfect Germanic, blonde, blue-eyed humans, that they personified the Übermensch that Nietzsche spoke about. For Christ's sake. Literally, for Christ's sake. But again, that must be Abrahamic. Oh, forgive me. Then he answers, or I answer again, I'm sorry. I'm fully aware that Wiki does not provide a complete account for something as complex as Norse mythology. However, it clearly references the personified values Vikings used to understand the world. The reason man invariably does so, and has in every culture which has ever existed, obviously must have served a vital function in the evolution of our species, or it wouldn't be so universal. And I provide a link to the belief system of the Old Norse religion. Then one of my lady friends, a very dear friend, if I might say so, comes in here and says to this postmodernist, they absolutely had a value system. She's Norwegian, so she ought to know. They had a different value system than Christianity, but they sure had one. For instance, to lie was considered to be one of the worst things you could do. Theft was to lie because you had lied about ownership. So don't run the lie that the Old Norse culture didn't have a value system. And now because he's called out and has no place left to hide, Listen to this. It gets beautiful here because this is where they have a saying in Norway to dance around the porridge. Danse rundt havregrøt, if that's the proper pronunciation. My rolled R's suffer when I'm angry. I feel like we're talking past each other, he says in his kind, gode og ydmyk norsk manner. I am not saying there are no personifications or grand narratives in other religions, which is exactly what he did say, by the way, but that the personifications are not clear-cut or black and white as in the Abrahamic religions. Again, he goes back to Abrahamic religions as though that's the only grand narrative under the substructure of Western philosophy and life. The very fact that we got a little tree here, you see that? That's not a Christian tradition. Our pagan ancestors brought some green in from outside because they were terrified, that the sun was disappearing. And even the host in the Catholic Church has a picture of the sun god on it. Catholicism is the biggest mixture of pagan traditions mixed with pseudo-Christianity that ever existed. But I digress. Scandinavia, like East Asia and most pre-Christian religions, generally had a collectivist grand narrative with flawed gods. Collectivist grand narrative. Oh, so the grand narrative is based on a collective. There is no me, there's just we. These people are the living incarnation of the Borg. Resistance is futile. Lower your shields. You will be assimilated. We have come to collect your biological material and add you to our distinctiveness. Buzz click. This is why they appear to be absolutely inhuman to me. They do not behave in a human manner. The very denial of the self is the most inhuman thing you could possibly do. Then he comes back to my lady friend, my dear lady friend. I thought we were discussing personifications of specific values, not value systems. You see, he just dances. I said value systems, then he goes to specific values when I said that those value systems weren't necessarily... He just deconstruct, tear down, and reduce. And then I answered to him, when did I say anything which emanates from a Jungian dream state could be straightforward? Mankind personifies values. Even if, as Nietzsche so clearly asserted, he had to become his own God, which would create his own value structure. And that, sir, you most assuredly have done. This is where the insistence that man is a socialist collective originates, and it is the thing which, in spite of your material view of the world, informs the ethical structure which you as a single part serve. This is the modern man's version of worshiping the gods of old, because that is the structure you submit yourself to. And then he comes back, avoiding what I made the mistake of. I've tried to cover too many things in one statement with him, because now he can hide behind coming back and trying to deconstruct only a portion of my assertion. Man personifies values. His comeback. Some try. Most people I know don't, because all attempts to personify values seem to fail, either by fitting reality but being too loose to be useful, or being specific but not fitting reality good enough to be useful. In Norway, they do not even think of themselves as individuals. To them, the state is God, and whatever the state tells them to do, that's what they do. Even if it's impossible to understand what the state has directed. I've seen bureaucrats in Norway, senior ones, in an advisory capacity, sit on their hands and make no decision whatsoever for fear of bucking the socialist collective. It's unbelievable. Okay? It is absolutely dysfunctional and unsustainable. He had to become his own God, which would create his own value structure, and that you, sir, you most assuredly have done. No one thinks like this. In Scandinavia, the law of Jente, now here it comes, something I've often spoke about, prevents this. No one is God, none is Übermensch. The herd agrees on herd morality. That seems to be good enough for the herd. The moron doesn't believe that viewing yourself as an extension of a socialist collective is the absolute denial of the grand narrative. And that is the creation of the Übermensch. So the very thing he said isn't the Übermensch, in fact, according to Nietzsche, is the Übermensch. This is modern man's worship of the gods of old, because that is the structure you submit yourself to. Just without any gods of worship, he says. Just strive for what seems to be best for the herd. So he admits they're Borg. The herd is looking after the herd, which of course is never the case. Because if you examine these socialist systems, there is a political elite over whom they have little oversight and no influence, who are making all the decisions. It is a totalitarian nightmare. I know, I've seen it. And I said to him, I seriously wonder if you watch my vlog. Do you deny being a socialist? Obviously, he said he's nothing other than a collective member of a herd, which is the very definition of socialist. Not bloody likely, I said. Does your national bojo insist on rigid cultural conformity? Of course it does. Is the law of Jente the petri dish in which social collectivism grows? I'd bet my life on it. Do you hound, pillar, and vilify any who dare to think for themselves? I have intimate experience with such. Does it reject the metaphorical idea of the sovereign individual? That is its very purpose. If you read Nietzsche, you would understand that his Übermensch is the socialist collective, which subjugates humanity to a collectivist herd with the state at the top. Is that the metaphorical meaning of the Tower of Babel? The entire point of that story is just that. Such systems are invariably tyrannical and doomed to fail, which is why, of course, in the metaphorical story of the Tower of Babel, men were struck down with the ability to communicate. Words no longer had any meaning. In other words, they all became postmodernists. Now he's dancing around the porridge again. It's just too beautiful. I don't consider myself a socialist. This man is admittedly now, it just keeps getting sillier, but I'm going to get down to the point. I'll get to the point where he admits he is a postmodernist, which is a cultural Marxist ideology. It's straight out of critical theory. Derrida and Foucault realized that communism had failed, and they were reinventing communism in a way to deconstruct Western thought and life. I want to get down to the point here. Here I go. Takes a minute here because this feed goes on forever, and I won't bore you to tears getting down to the point where he admits he's a cultural Marxist. I agree with Foucault that any theory that tries to give absolute answers is pure bullshit. As I said earlier, I tend to agree a little bit with everyone, but not fully with anyone. Every time we have an election, I take these surveys to see which party I agree with most, and tend to agree with all parties from the far left to the far right. They don't have a far right party in Norway, by the way, 30 to 40% of the time. On a left-right scale, I tend to test inconclusive from 0% to 5% right. On a progressive conservative scale, I tend to test inconclusive plus 5% to minus 5%. Then he says, yes, I'm into deconstructionism, depending on what definition you're using. I got it along with anti-realism from the problem of universals and the old Greeks. Then I said to him, I'm so impressed with your neo-Marxist postmodern deconstruction that I deconstructed the Norwegian to Noggy. He was wondering why I'd called him a Noggy. So, admitting he's allied with Foucault and Derrida, admitting he's a deconstructionist, and yet at the same time, not admitting that those philosophies are cultural Marxist, is just one more example of radical left postmodernism being incapable of coming to any constructive conclusions. It has no power of construction and a great deal of power of deconstruction. This all came out of a discussion on my brother-in-law's feed, where he had posted the Epoch Times and had stated several things about the fact that there seemed to be a great number of inconsistencies with the voting process in the U.S., and that matters were still before the court, and more matters being brought to the court all the time, with more evidence, apparently an astounding amount of evidence. And the Norwegians on my brother-in-law's feed absolutely tried to silence him. Now I posted my vlog to that feed, and this guy followed me onto YouTube from my brother-in-law's post on Facebook. So I'm convinced he was one of the ones that was trying to shut Stein up. That's their final trick. We're seeing it here in Canada. If you disagree with any of their deconstructive premises, if you refuse to admit that you're inherently biased, racist, bigoted, then by the very fact of your denial of being those things, they insist that you have become those things. We have no option now but to attack this idiocy, because that's what it is. It's absolute idiocy. It is a denial, a fundamental denial of all the principles of reality itself. Good thing to think about, good thing to pray about for those of you who may be Christians of the high church order that like to use Advent as 4 Sundays preceding Christmas, that you can pray about such matters. I grew up in the low church persuasion that I didn't know what Advent was until I met Onaseri. Nevertheless, you have a great Advent Sunday, first Advent Sunday, and think about some of these things. Talk to your friends and neighbors about cultural Marxism. Ask them if they believe this deconstruction, but moreover, ask them if they're aware that postmodernism is a cultural Marxist ideology, and that it's merely a parasite on a religious substructure. Have a great Sunday.